Welcome to the Divine Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie Foster, a professional psychic medium, tarot reader, and spiritual mentor, here to provide you with the next steps towards your dream reality, along with clarity and deep validation while on your spiritual journey. I have an immense passion for all things paranormal, spiritual, and of course, having some super fun chats with incredibly knowledgeable people. In each episode, we will expand our minds, ignite our inner psychics, embrace our spiritual awakening journeys, and live a super grounded, witchy life. I hope you learned something new in today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Divine Gossip Podcast. I have a beautiful guest with me today, DeeAnne. How are you? Tell us everything about you. Who are you? What do you do?
Oh my gosh. Well, I am, someone asked me this question, like, who am I the other day? And I said, I am a child of divine. I'm a child of God.
Period. Yeah.
Yeah, that, like that, I mean, that can mean a lot of things for a lot of different people, but in essence, that's where I'm at. And I've loved going through my journey in creating that relationship with divinity within myself. And so it's been a pretty fun adventure. That's for sure.
I'm obsessed with that answer. I think that encapsulates everything that each of us are about. I love that. Um, so I have so many questions for you. Someone on your team emailed me to have you on the podcast. And I was like, absolutely, because I heard fantasy fiction and I was like, oh my God. Yeah, I'm obsessed already. And near-death experiences. So I want to get into like
Yeah.
both of those.
Oh, fun. Okay. So yes, I wrote a book that was actually mostly channeled, but it was also based on my real life experience, but I didn't want it to be about me. So my book called The Ark, it follows the story of a woman named Celeste. And so she has a few near-death experiences and feels like she's cursed in a way. She feels like there's something wrong with her. And so she goes through this experience of like trying to find her way. And in one of her near deaths, she goes into the angel kingdom. So she hangs out with angels and she learns all about spirit and connection. And so this is not unlike my own story. So I actually had my first near death when I was 5. I was eating one of those round jawbreaker candies, those hard round candies. And my dad said, DeeAnne, go sit down before you choke. And I went to go sit down, and sure enough, I choked. So that jawbreaker got caught in my throat. My dad came running around, wrapped his arms around me, started doing the Heimlich maneuver, and that jawbreaker did not come loose.
Wow.
So I went limp in my dad's arms, and I, in that moment, had an out of body experience. I remember floating above my body, watching my dad panic below. I remember watching my mom run to the phone to get help. My older sister peeking around the corner to see what the commotion was. But I didn't feel any of that chaos below. I felt total peace. And I don't remember much else other than watching the scene below and just feeling that essence of like feeling like I was being held, feeling like I was safe and it was all okay. And, not really having to care. Maybe unconditional love is another feeling that I felt. But in my 5-year-old mind, that's as far as I had gotten. And my dad did something you're not supposed to do, but he used his thumb. He pushed against my throat and he was able to just get enough in there that he could pop that candy out
Oh,
and
wow.
get breathing again. So, that experience, has stayed with me my whole life. Because after that, I started to really notice that I was super sensitive to energy. I started to have precognition. So I started to become psychic. So I would see things before they would happen. Like I would wake up in the morning and I'd tell my mom, hey, mom, so and so's mom died last night. And like my mom would have just got off the phone and, couldn't believe that I was telling her what I was telling her. She's like, how do you know these things? I'm like, I don't know. They tell me, I just
Mhm.
understand. And I was raised Catholic. So my mom didn't really know what to do with me. And I'm grateful I had a really beautiful upbringing full of love and nourishment. But mom didn't really know what to do with me. So, she would tell me to pray and, so I would pray. And, at the same time, I could feel that there was a certain level of discomfort. So I just started to keep things to myself.
Mm.
So I would have these notions, I would have these feelings, and I just stuffed them away. And I think a lot of times as children, we're told, not to be seen, not to be heard, or we are told that we're being too sensitive or like whatever it might be. And then we shrink ourselves. So I spent a lot of time shrinking myself in to be quote unquote normal.
Mhm.
And um, and that was a struggle for much of my life. I remember actually in high school, we were all kind of standing outside the smoke pit because that's where the cool kids hung out. And one of the boys in class took an orange and he had thrown it at a seagull that was flying around, and he hit the seagull. And the seagull landed in the middle of the crowd of all the students, and the seagull was flapping around, obviously in distress and pain. And nobody knew what to do, but kids were yelling like, "Oh man, like finish it off," or whatever. And it was just such a scene for me. And I don't know what compelled me to do it. And people still talk about it to this day, but I went up to that bird and I just picked the bird up gently. And another friend ran and got a car and we took it to the vet to be put down humanely. And I remember people like being like, "Oh, you're going to have diseases and what were you thinking? And it could have bit you and all these things." And I just had a knowing inside of me that this is what was needed to be done. And so I just did what needed to be done. And there was many moments in my life that I stepped in, but of course I would question that because I'm like, "Oh, great. Now everyone's like laughing about, DeeAnne picking up the bird and the bird whisperer and
Yeah.
whatever, and the jokes that came after that." But you know, I'm glad that in some of those moments I trusted, although in many of them I didn't listen to my intuition because I had questioned it growing up, right? And
Mhm.
wondering if that was normal or not normal. So fast forward to my first career, I became an EMT and firefighter. So I worked in EMS. And then I would have spirits come home with me. So because sometimes we'd have to spend time with deceased bodies and so I remember one time in particular, we had gone to a house and the woman was elderly and had died in her sleep, but I had to like move her body and help the police take pictures and all the things. And I remember going home and just feeling like I had this woman sitting beside me, and it creeped me out and it freaked me out. I was scared. I had like 6 or 7 showers. Like I was like, "Oh, get this feeling off." I washed my clothes a couple times, like all the things that I knew to do. And, I ultimately ended up leaving that career partly because of that, but also because I had a knee injury and I struggled to lift my patients and do some of the heavier duty work that I needed to do in that industry. And so this is what led me into my second near death. So I want to speak about my second near death because this is where I started to really put the pieces together. So my second near death, I'm now about 26 years old, and I am recovering from this knee surgery at home. So reconstruction of my left knee, and I am hobbling on crutches to get from the kitchen to my bed in the living room. And my brother-in-law is tending to me at that time. But as I'm moving, all of a sudden, I start to just see black, like everything's going black. And before I know it, I am like in a whole nother world. So I found myself in what I would consider a heavenly realm. I was surrounded, oh, Mackenzie, I was surrounded by these beautiful orbs of light, like the brightest colors that you can imagine. And they were all different colors and all different shapes of these beautiful orbs. And I knew in my heart they were angels. I had no doubt in my mind. And I remember consciously thinking for a moment, like, "Oh, what about everybody else? Like, what about my family?" And then before I knew it, that thought was gone. And I was so immersed in euphoria. I was in unconditional love. I was in this incredible space of joy, of peace, of harmony, like all the things that we crave here, in this three-dimensional world. I was in this beautiful space. And I remember thinking, "I'm staying here. This is amazing." I remember that conscious thought. And to which I heard a response, which was not in words, but I knew it in my head, it transcribed into words. And they said, "You have work to do. It's not your time, you have work to do." So I came to with my brother-in-law staring at me all wide-eyed. And of course, he helped me to, get myself back together and made sure I was breathing okay and all of those things. But I didn't know how to articulate what happened to me because my first thought is, I can't share this with anyone. People are going to think I'm really crazy. All of the experience I had had up until the point, even spirits coming home with me as an EMT and firefighter, I had kept all that pretty hush hush because I was sure that I would be put into a mental institution or something. And so I didn't say anything right away. I didn't even tell him right away. But in the days to follow, I could feel it, like it was so compelling. My experience was just so incredible. I was like, I have to share this. So I'm telling a girlfriend who I felt safe with at home. This is a few days after. And I'm telling this girlfriend about my angelic experience. And my brother-in-law, who was living with me at the time, he comes running into the kitchen, slams his hand on the counter, and he says, "I knew it. I felt the angels too." So he also had a spiritual experience
Oh,
because
wow.
he went into panic mode. As soon as I went unconscious, he couldn't find my pulse. He didn't think I was breathing. He was about to call 911. Like he was like full on, I got to do something here. This woman is dying. And so he went to go call for help. And he said, "I felt these energies come in." They said, "No, don't worry. She's going to be okay."
Hmm.
And he said, "I felt, yes." He said, "I felt peace all of a sudden." And he said, within a few seconds after that, he said, "You opened your eyes with a smile on your face."
That's
Is that
awesome.
something?
Yeah.
Like he filled in a part of the story for me and he validated the story. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I knew that this was a story I needed to start speaking. I needed to start sharing it, even though it was very vulnerable for me to share it. I came from a science background. I spent most of my career in health sciences,
Yeah.
right? So when you come from science and then you have these things that aren't explainable, it's like you want to find logical evidence and you want to find understanding in it. But his validation was enough for me. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, okay, so you had your second near death and then your life changed and you figured it out." No, I did not. It took me a while. So after that second near death, I was still very much caught up in this what success meant. And I was playing the I'll be happy when game. Do you know that game? I'll be happy
Absolutely.
when the bill is paid. I'll be happy when this class is done. I'll be happy when whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get caught up in this I'll be happy when, by the way, it's a losing game. And I was playing the game. So even though I had this really incredible second near death experience, I still had so much work to do around what I thought I was supposed to be to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I thought I needed to show up in this certain way and be a certain way in order to fit in. So I continued to be in that space. I got married, I had two amazing children, I had a successful career in teaching, like all of these things were happening for me. But here's the thing, I was still miserable. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, because I had all what people would say would be a successful life, because I had that and I was still unhappy, I then felt all this guilt and shame. Like I felt like, how dare I not be happy when you have all of this, And then I would sit in this guilt and this shame about it. So I ended up spiraling really deeply after my second child was born. I didn't know this at the time, but I was experiencing postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone who's experienced that before, it's like it's so heavy and it's so distorting that you actually go into so much emotional pain. So
Mm-hmm.
I was in emotional despair and I was getting to a point where I was really thinking about taking my own life.
Mm-hmm.
I thought everyone would be better off without me. I can't find happiness. And also, by the way, if you've ever known anyone who's experienced an NDE before, near death, we kind of crave to go back to that space.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I was craving to go back to that heavenly space.
Yeah.
I'd searched everywhere here outside of myself, like, okay, heaven in the career, heaven in having children, heaven in the relationship, or whatever. I was like seeking that heavenly space again, and I couldn't find it. So I was in despair. So this is about now 5 years or so after my second near death. And I am like losing it, right? So I'm laying in bed and I'm like, okay, God, I got to pray on this. Like,
Hmm.
here we go. I said, this is my path unless you show me another way.
Right.
Unless you show me another way. And guess what? God showed me another way. And I was given this entire vision of creating one of the businesses that I had created at the time was a holistic healthcare system. So I got up the next morning after I had this vision. I was determined. I'm like, okay, this is my path. And that holistic healthcare vision brought me on this path of spirituality because I started to meet all these incredible spiritual teachers,
Mm.
and they would share these things and they'd be like, oh, have you heard about the Akashic records? So the Akashic records ends up showing up for me. Okay, the Akashic records, your soul's library. This is like my area of expertise now. I've been doing this for well over a decade, but I took the course as a skeptic. I went in there being like, there's no way, this is hocus pocus, again, my science background. But I
Yeah.
thought, I'm just going to open myself to it because I'm not finding what I need outside of myself. And I need to now get to know these parts that I buried away so deeply, believing that they were a curse.
Hmm.
So I went and I took the Akashic Records course and I was blown away. All of my gifts came rushing back to the surface. And that's when my life really started to change. That's when I started to say, oh my gosh, I've been running from my soul, but I have really been needing to run towards my soul.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we're so good at staying distracted. I was scared to do the inner work because I was scared I was going to find all these skeletons in the closet and I was going to go through all this dark night of the soul everyone talks about. And although there might be some of those moments that we go through, some difficulty and heaviness in unpacking all of the stuff, I got to tell you, Mackenzie, it was the greatest gift I ever gave myself.
I believe it.
And so that's my focus now, is to help people to run towards their soul, even though it might feel a bit scary, even though it might feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, am I opening up my can of worms, so to speak? There is such invigorating beauty in that. And I have invoked my sense of awe and wonder. And it has been, oh man, has it been fun. It's actually been fun, believe it or not.
Well, that is all so beautiful. Wow. I got chills like 10 times while you were talking. I
I
love
still
that.
get chills telling the stories. I still get chills. I love it. Yeah.
So, yeah, there I have so many questions. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that with
You're so welcome.
yeah, thank you for sharing all that with me and with everyone. I want to start with like you channeling your book because I think that's really cool. And I know a lot of people, well, I've encountered a lot of people in my world who want to write a book and who have all these stories to share and channeling abilities. And I want to know, like, when it came to channeling your book, obviously it was from personal experience that you developed it, but is there any like lessons you learned while you were trying to like because I think about something so vulnerable happening to you, you're now putting it on paper, you're now sharing it with the world, like what came up for you, how did you move through like everyone seeing your vulnerability?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first things first, if you feel like you have a story inside of you, let it come out because it is one of the most cathartic processes. Like I did so much healing in my writing experience. So
Yeah.
even if nobody read it, I still received incredible value just from putting it to paper. So that's the first thing I want to encourage people, like just write it, even if you're not sure if it'll even go out into the world, right?
Yeah.
Like just write it because you will get so much value out of it in itself. So that's the first thing I want to share. The second thing is a big part of my process is getting out of my own way, you
Yeah.
know, because what happens is we get so caught up with the ego aspect of our mind. And I want to speak to that because this is a big part of the work that I do, and it's helped me tremendously. But the ego part of our mind, that's known as the false self in the study of metaphysics. So I also have a degree in metaphysics. And so we study the false self and the true self. So the false self is that ego mind, that's the logical mind. And then we've got our higher self mind, our God mind, our divine mind, whatever you want to call that. And what happens is that ego mind over thousands and thousands of years has started to hijack much of our thinking. Back in the day when we were cave people, the ego was like, oh, there's a predator, run, and we need the ego. So we're not trying to get the ego to dissolve completely, but it doesn't know its place. So it intercepts in everywhere that we possibly want to go. It blocks us. And so for many of us, it holds us hostage. I want to give you this example because it was such a profound experience for me. I was writing a final exam of my final class in one of my degrees. So I also have a health management degree. And I had worked on it while having kids and while having a career. And so I'd been working on this degree a long time. And now I'm at the finish line, right? And the class just before that I had finished, I had actually failed an exam in that class, which was like the first time I'd failed any exam, and I had to do a rewrite. Thankfully, the rewrite was successful, but now I had this test anxiety that I'd never really had before. So now here I am writing this last exam of my last class. I am at the home stretch. I'm so excited to be done. And while I'm writing the test, my ego is coming in, and my ego is saying, oh, you don't know any of the answers. You're failing. You're doing horrible. You're never going to finish this degree. Like all of that chatter was happening. And I made it through the exam, but by the time I was done, I was so emotional. I ran to my car, I bawled my eyes out. I called my husband at the time. I was like, I failed. I can't believe it. And he's like, well, just get yourself home. By the time I got home, I had calmed down a little bit, but I decided to email my prof and I said, I know I failed this exam. Can you tell me what areas I need to work on? Because I want to get the rewrite done as soon as I can. I was so eager to finish the degree. And she so lovingly responded, I don't know whose exam you think you wrote, but you got 87%.
Oh, that's awesome.
I had convinced myself that I had failed though. And this is like, yay me, I passed. But the point of this is, how often have you let your ego mind tell you a story that isn't even true?
Yeah.
Right? Something bad happens and we're like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever, only to figure out months or days or maybe years later that was the best thing ever to happen. So
Mm-hmm.
our ego comes in and it places all this judgment and it really holds us back. So one of the biggest invitations that I have for people listening, and especially if you want to get your story out to the world, is to befriend the ego. Actually build a healthy relationship with the ego, because the ego is going to come in, it's going to say, no one wants to hear your story, or what are you doing this for? You're wasting your time. Your job is to say, oh, thank you, ego. I know you're trying to keep me safe, but I've got this.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that you can put that ego into its place, and the more you can set a boundary with it, the quieter it becomes. My ego does not run the show for me anymore. There are maybe moments, okay, I'll admit, but it's a practice for me. So I continuously practice getting my ego to step aside. And sometimes I'll even ask my ego questions. I'll even say, hey, what is this really about? And
Yeah.
then they will show me an experience that I had or something. And then I can say, oh, no wonder you're coming in to try and keep me safe. Ego, thank you so much. But it's not even true, and I can talk to it in a way that honors it, right? But that
Mm-hmm.
also creates those boundaries. And one of the biggest techniques that I suggest for people is to give your ego a name so that you can separate yourself. Because in our minds, right, we forget we're multidimensional beings. We have these different aspects to us, and then we let these thoughts kind of run amok and we're on the hamster wheel, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if you give your ego mind a name, now all of a sudden we kind of can create this opportunity for us to be the witness or the observer.
Yeah.
We do that, then we're in a power position. Now the ego's no longer in the driver's seat, right? One of my clients, I just loved the name, so I'm sharing it, but she called her ego mind Ivana Gripe a lot. Isn't that hilarious? Ivana Gripe a lot. I think it's so fun. So you can have fun, give your ego mind a name and have fun with it. Her name is Jane. I like the name Jane. I didn't want it to be a name that I didn't like, but I wanted to create some separation in myself so that I could call her on stuff. Because otherwise, I have trouble discerning, oh, is this coming in from me or my ego or from my higher self? And so that helps us to then create this discernment or this ability to say, oh, wait, that's coming in from ego. I can choose wisely what I decide to take from this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another tip or tool to help people if they're going into the writing process for themselves. As it relates to actually channeling, the biggest thing is to build the relationship with that higher self, the God mind, right? Divine is our supply. Divine is our supply. So divine will give us any insight, any thought, any energy that is required to fulfill our most divine mission. So if your divine mission is to create a book that's going to get out into the world, your job is to open up that channel, to open up that imagination.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize this, but imagination is actually a really important piece of our intuition.
Yes.
When I'm teaching my students how to dial in and use the Akashic records and tune into their intuition, a lot of them are like, well, I just had this vision and then I think I'm making it up. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, yeah, you think you're making it up. There's a difference between divine imagination coming from a source and then our ego imagination. Our ego imagination usually makes up the negative story of like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. And the divine imagination comes in and it gives us all of this beautiful, beautiful insight and wisdom and opportunity. So again, building that relationship will open that up, but also letting our imagination come in.
Mm-hmm.
Invoking the imagination is actually part of our divine intuition.
Yes.
This is one of the things that a lot of people miss because they're like, well, I feel like I'm just making it up. I'm like, if you're making it up, it's still coming from source. It's still coming
Yeah.
from somewhere,
Yes.
right?
Yes, I agree.
So it's reminding us that we have this beautiful, beautiful skill of imagination and to look at the world with that awe and wonder. That's one of the biggest things you can do is like, I wonder what that means. I wonder if I pull on that thread, what will come of that? I wonder, I wonder, I wonder. And that allows us to really lean into this beautiful space of creation. So when I was writing this book, yes, you're right. I was writing some of my own story. But as I started to lean in, I would open up my Akashic records as I wrote the story. So the
Okay.
story was written from that space of the Akash, that higher dimensional frequency. But more so when I got to the part where the character Celeste goes into the ark, which is the angel realm,
Okay.
once she goes in there, then that, like all of those experiences, like they did come from different visions and dreams I'd had, but spirit really came in and took over,
Okay. Cool.
allowed me to really express. Now, I got to give a shout out to my girl, Darlene Butts, because Darlene was my co-channeler. And what I mean by that is I finished the whole book. I sent it to Darlene, who does copywriting and editing and stuff. And she said, you've made a beautiful book, but, and I remember my heart sinking. I was like, oh my God, what's wrong with the book? She's like, you've never written a fantasy fiction before. I said, no, I haven't. And all my other co-authoring job, like they were all my own kind of story. So very different type of writing. And she goes, well, she's like, you've done a beautiful job creating the furniture. She said, I'm going to paint it for you. So she gave me this analogy and understanding. So then she took the book and then she channeled a whole nother layer upon mine. And
Wow.
it's so profound because she would write things in the book and I'd be like, oh, Darlene, I didn't have this in the book. How do you know this? And she goes, I don't know. That's just the download I got.
That's so
So
cool.
yeah, it was so cool. And now for the second and third book, because this is like the arc is a trilogy. So there's two other books in the trilogy.
Okay.
Now we're doing it. We're really co-channeling. So we've actually come together because I get downloads and she gets downloads and then we put them together and then
Wow.
just let it unfold. It's been really, really cool. So it's a very unique way to write a book. But boy, has it ever been fun. So yeah, shout out to my girl Darlene because this book would not be what it is without her help. That's for sure.
I love all of that. That was really, really good tips. I agree with everything you said about the ego voice and all of that. I love the idea of giving your ego a name. I think that is so genius. I've never thought of that before. That is very, very helpful. Thank you. I'm
Yes.
going to do that.
Yeah, it was a game changer for me, honestly, Mackenzie. It was like, oh, okay, I can separate that. You know what I mean? And I can take control
Yes.
of that. Like, we're supposed to run the ego. We're supposed
Yeah.
to tell the ego what to do, how to do it. And
Yes.
instead, it's been the opposite for most of us human beings.
Oh, absolutely.
So that, I'm telling you, game changer for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. So earlier you were mentioning how you were playing the if this when this happens I'll be happy game,
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
very familiar with that. Unfortunately, I think a lot of us are.
I think so.
Yeah, because I think it's probably a lot of factors, but I mean society has definitely built it to achieve and more and more and more and more, you know.
Uh-huh. It's been ingrained in us. It's been a conditioning for us. Yes.
Yes, absolutely, I agree. And what was interesting when you said God showed you another way. Like you were like, if this is it, okay, but like if there's another way, like show me. Can you talk about how, because I know you said the Akashic records came in, but is there any other like opportunities or shifts or challenges that got brought up as a result of having that conversation with God? Like what did the universe do to like shift you towards your path now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, so in that moment, as I was laying there and contemplating how I was going to take my own life, and praying, I was very clear. I said, "You need to show me the other path, otherwise, this is the path I'm taking." It was almost
Yeah.
like an ultimatum, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I actually describe it as an angelic energy that came in. It was Archangel Michael for me that came in and showed me the vision. Like I knew very tangibly that it was an angelic energy. And because of my near death I had had previously, I could connect those dots. It took me a little bit, but I was able to connect those dots. So then the next day, so I had this, it was a business vision, right, of creating this holistic healthcare system. And that was like the next step. So the
Okay.
next morning I got up and I was like, I'm going to do this. Here's what I'm creating. My husband at the time was like, this is the best idea you've ever had. Like, go for it. Was so supportive of it. And so I really immersed myself in that. But what I ended up doing was also getting distracted by that. So it was still a little bit of more of the escapism, right? Of like, oh, I'll just throw myself into the workaholic mode, and then I still
Mhm.
won't have to deal with my emotions or feelings.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is what happens for most of us. We get so distracted in this three-dimensional world. And so we'll get pulled into the workaholism or maybe the escapism with alcohol and drugs or like whatever it is. We live in a very addicted world
Yeah. Yeah.
where we are hooked into all of these elements, right, that keep us distracted from going inward. And so even though I started this business, I was still in the throes of, dialing in, but with the caveat of this, I saw other people doing their inner work and I wanted what they had. Because as I saw these people who were in these elevated states of consciousness, they looked so much more peaceful. They didn't look all strung out like I was like buzzing. Oh, I got to do this. I got to do this. Like that was me. I was the overachiever, right? So I was like always going a million miles a minute. And I saw these people with this grace about them, with this calm about them. And I remember saying, I want what they're having. It
Mhm.
was a very conscious choice, really, because I thought, I don't want to live this way. It's not working for me. And I didn't even need to have the near death experiences to get to that. And that's what I want to say that to your listeners. Like, please don't self-induce a near death experience. You don't
Yeah.
have to, right?
Yeah.
You can just make a conscious choice of like, hey, wait a second, there's so much more for me. And none of it is out here. None of it is outside of ourselves. If you want to change your life, do you know what you need to do? You need to change the relationship with yourself. That's the priority. Once you have a healthy relationship with yourself, and by yourself, I mean with your ego mind and your higher mind, your God self, right? The God within you, again, whatever your belief system might be around that. Once you develop those relationships, And once you create healthy relationships, then everything outside of you changes, right? Everything that we see and we experience out here is a reflection of what's happening in here. So if I'm in turmoil inside of myself, turmoil is going to show up outside of myself. If
Yeah.
I'm judging myself inwardly, I'm going to notice judgment come up in my life outwardly. So people often say, because one of my biggest things that I encourage is creating heaven, your own heaven on earth, right? Like I speak about that now because now I know I don't need to go back to a near death, or I don't need to find it outside of myself. It is in here. Heaven is within us. It was innately given to us, just like happiness and peace and joy and all the things that we desire already innately given to us. It's all there. Our job is to go inward to get it, to unpack all of the stuff that has clouded that, all of the heaviness, all of the traumas, all of the burdens that we carry, is to go through that and slowly uncover all of that. Because as we do, we get to the good stuff. We get to the heaven within ourselves. And then once we've got that, then guess what shows up? Oh, this heavenly conversation, right? Guess what shows up? Opportunities, experiences that really allow us to immerse more deeply into that joy and that happiness and all of the things. So it really truly is an inward journey. That is, people are like, well, I don't know which direction to go in my life. The answer is always go inward,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And so what does that look like then becomes the question, right? Because I got to tell you, I don't meditate for hours in a day, guys. I don't have time for that. I got 2 young kids. I got a busy business. I don't have time for that. But what I do is I weave spirituality and connection into my day. And so, even if for a moment I'm just pausing and I'm taking a few breaths, even for a moment, if I just go and put my feet in the grass, even for a moment, if I just send somebody a note of love and encouragement, like I will sprinkle that connection in through my day. And that allows me to stay attuned to that higher vibrational frequency of joy and peace and all of those things that we
Yeah.
desire. But even more than that, it requires us to start having conversations, right? Like I said, befriend the ego, have a conversation with it. Thanks, ego, but I've got this. Oh, interesting. Can you tell me more about that, ego? Because at the end of the day, within ourselves are different aspects that are just waiting to be seen and heard.
Mm-hmm.
A child who just wants attention, they're just waiting to be seen and heard. And most of us as human beings just want to be seen and heard. And so if we want to be seen and heard on the outside, then we've got to be willing to see and hear ourselves on the inside. Yes. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, I talk to myself a lot. Yes, I do take the time to reflect. And there's lots, again, little tools that you can use, such as journaling, such as positive affirmation, self-talk, such as prayer, meditation, again, all of those things can help us. But I'm telling you, it doesn't need to be that complex.
Yes.
Spirit works simply. Spirit wants us to simplify things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my invitation. If you want to do that work, just start building the relationship with that false self or the ego self and that higher self that you have within you. And even just doing that, you're going to start to get more awareness and more understanding as you continue that journey inward. And there might be times where certain things come up and you get triggered, but there's also some beautiful ways that we can alchemize that energy and leverage that energy. Actually, I'm hearing to just keep going and talk about that. Is that okay if I talk about?
Absolutely. I need to hear this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the shit's gonna come up, Mackenzie, right? Like there's gonna be stuff that comes up. I was recently triggered from a client who actually stopped making payments and then they ghosted me. And I felt so betrayed and I felt so hurt by this client. And immediately, we go into anger, we go into that like betrayal energy. And and then I remembered my own tools on this. And these are tools of alchemy. So how do we shift the energy of anger, let's say, into something where we can have peace? Okay, so let's just say the opposite of anger is peace, not necessarily, but for this particular case, let's use that. So I was feeling really angry, hurt, if you will, about that. And one of the things that happens is when we feel a feeling that we don't really want to feel, we want to stuff it away, right? It's like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or oh, I don't like this feeling. It could be grief, it could be shame, any feeling, right? And so we stuff it away, and then our physical body often carries that, and then we hold on to it until the next time something else happens, and then we get really triggered again. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have this opportunity of looking at energy without judging it. I'm not now looking at this anger as a bad thing. What if there's something in this for me? And by the way, there is. In every emotion that you feel, there is some gold in there. Our job is to leverage that emotion and leverage the gold in every experience, because everything is of source, of divine. So there's something in it, in for us, in every experience, in everything, right? So if we have that kind of understanding, well, then even this anger that I was feeling, I can lean into this and I can say, okay, what's in it for me? So one of the techniques that I have is I actually like to cup my hands, like as if I'm holding a little bunny or a bird or something, but I'm holding the anger in my hands. So I see maybe the letters of anger, or see red, or whatever I connect anger with. And I look at my hands and I look at that energy and I say, oh, hi, anger. Man, am I mad that you're here. Why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? What is going on? Why are you coming up again? Why did this situation happen for you to come up again? I start having a conversation. So, again, back to building relationship. And now I build a relationship with this anger. And you know what happens? The anger says, oh, thank goodness she sees me and hears me.
Mm-hmm.
And already the anger's not so dense. Already the anger's not so intense, because I've allowed myself to just pause for a moment and say, hey, anger, I know you're showing me something. I might not be happy you're here, but I know you're teaching me. Can you show me what that is? Now, sometimes that will come right away. Like for me, I was reminded that I was still struggling with boundaries. For me, that was the lesson for me, is that I had lacked boundaries with this particular client. I should have been more firm in my boundaries out of the gates, and I wasn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I learned already, I was like, oh my God, I need to tighten up my boundaries. Okay, yes, got that out of that. But even more than that, it also showed me, it reminded me that I could also move the energy of that I didn't have to stay angry, right? That I didn't have to stay in that space. So again, there was so much more learning that I pulled from that, but I got so much out of that. And guess what happened? That anger turned to peace about the situation.
Yeah.
I no longer feel that anger. Now I feel at peace. I even wrote them a lovely message to say, hey, I'm sorry I was a bit angry about this situation before, but I see you, and I wish you well. So it ended in a way that was, peaceful, versus, oh, how could you do this to me? I'm so angry. And then them going out and having that energy.
Yeah.
So we have this ability to alchemize. So as we're doing the inner work, and as things are pulling up, right? Like we're getting triggered or whatever, or an emotion's coming up, or maybe we just wake up one morning and we're feeling sad. We can say, cup our hands, look at that sadness and say, hi, sadness. Oh, I'm not happy that you're here. I'm feeling so sad, but I know you're teaching me something. What is it? And then
Mm-hmm.
just sit with it. If it doesn't come right away, it's okay. It will come eventually. The point is that we're already alchemizing and shifting that energy without getting swallowed in it, Because when we bury it, it tends to almost swallow us up sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it eats away at us. So it's a beautiful way of moving and alchemizing that energy without getting hyperfixated necessarily, without getting swallowed up in the emotion itself.
Yes.
So that's been one of my techniques that helps me to move through some of those situations where I feel hurt or angry or resentful or guilty or shameful or whatever it is. Rather than judging it, I'm looking at it with neutrality. I'm looking at it from a perspective of like, there's something in that for me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to judge it. I'm not going to judge how I'm feeling. Instead, I'm going to say, there's something in there for me too. What do I get
Mm-hmm.
to learn from that? How can I leverage that emotion, or again, that experience that triggered the emotion? What's in it for me?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's always something in it.
Yes, I completely agree. That was beautiful. I love that so much. I needed to hear that. I'm sure everyone else did too. Yeah, I think it sounds so simple. I mean, it's probably that sometimes it doesn't feel simple, but just explaining it, having a conversation with yourself sounds so easy, but it's not because we were never taught to like actually communicate in general, let alone with ourselves and let alone with our negative emotions because we were taught that it's bad and stuff it down and it doesn't matter. But if you just feel it and move through it and observe, it's game changing.
It is, I can't tell you how many pity parties I've had. And like some
Yes.
days I do just feel like having a pity party. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like everybody else. And some days, yeah, I'm just like, yeah, I do want to be sad and I do want to be mad. And I
Yeah.
let myself just have that. The difference is that we're not sitting and wallowing in it.
Yeah. And
Consciously
consuming.
choosing, right? We're
Yeah.
consciously choosing to say, wait a second, I do have a choice here. This
Yeah.
is a choose your own adventure. It is the power of free will. That was one of the greatest gifts we were given was the power of free will, which means we can consciously choose our thoughts too. And
Hmm.
we can choose how we're moving through this life and how we are leveraging every experience. We have a conscious choice in that.
Hmm.
And the difficulty has been that the ego mind, again, has hijacked most of our thinking and most of our thoughts. And so the ego mind makes a lot of the decisions for us. And then we wonder why we end up in jobs we don't love. We wonder
Yes.
why we end up in relationships we don't love. Many of that, the reason for that is because that ego has hijacked us into believing things need to look a certain way or they are a certain way that they're not. Think back to
Yeah.
that test. I was certain I had failed. My ego had completely convinced me, and yet I had passed with flying colors, right?
Hmm.
So what are we convincing ourselves of that isn't even true,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Like you get going on that journey of like turning inward, would you say that instead of operating based on like only external sources and like just living in the 3D instead of like turning into who you truly are, you are no longer, I mean, maybe sometimes we're human, we slip up, but you make fear-based decisions or like decisions in action, you take action based on like a false sense of reality and you're not actually in tune with yourself. Does that make sense?
absolutely. And I have another story to share to reinforce that point because when we are sitting in that fear, and by the way, the only way through fear is through fear, right?
Yes.
So we've got to be willing to lean into that fear. But what happens when we are kind of getting caught on the hamster wheel, I call it, of that fear, is we are making decisions that are more from a state of fight or flight. And so what that does is it creates more experiences that are actually more fight or flight where we
Yes.
feel safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this story is a fun one. I really love this story. I was down in Mexico with my partner Dan. We used to have a house down there in a little place called Mulahay. It was like off the beaten track. We're like in the middle of nowhere. And we had learned about this little beach that had all these seashells, like all shapes and sizes of these seashells. So this a local man wrote us this like little map that we had to follow. So we go out on this adventure to find this beach and we find the village and we turn off at the village and then we drive for about like 20 miles through like basically a sand road. Like it wasn't really a road, but we're like, we think it's a road. We don't even know if we're going to the right place. Okay. So we drive for like 20 miles, but it feels like an eternity. By the way, it's plus 42 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it is hot. Okay.
Okay.
Plus 2 degrees. It is like sweltering hot, like super, super hot. Like you walk outside and you're like struggling to catch your breath. It was so hot. So we go down this road. We eventually come to the ocean. And sure enough, there's this beach with all of these shells washed up. So we park the truck, we get out, we collect our shells, hop in the ocean to cool off, get back in the truck to leave, and our tires are spinning. So we're like, oh, we can get out of this. It's just a little bit of sand. And so we do some things. No, tires are spinning. Check our phones. There is no service. Okay. Again, we're in the middle of Mexico, in the middle of nowhere. Okay. So right away, because I had watched Narcos Mexico, the whole flight down to Mexico, my
Mhm.
mind went straight to the cartel is going to kill us.
Right.
We're dead for sure. There's no way we're surviving this. But then the other thought came in. how am I going to walk 20 miles in flip-flops in plus 42 with next to no water?
Yeah.
And that was a real like dire emergency kind of situation. So we're panicking. Dan's under the truck trying to clear sand out, lower tires, pressure, all the things. And like, we're not going anywhere. Like, the more we try, the deeper we're sinking. So I'm in panic mode, right? And in that panic mode, like, we're really not doing anything efficient at all. Okay. We're just kind of spinning around like da da da. And so I decided to just pause for a second. I was like, okay, take some breaths. So I took some breaths. And when I stopped to take those breaths, Mackenzie, I heard the words, start walking. That's all that I heard was start walking. It didn't make any sense to me that I would leave down at the truck at the time, but I heard those words and I knew I had to listen. So I said to Dan, I said, I'm going to pack a bag. I'm going to start walking and maybe you can catch up, in a little bit here. Okay. So he's like, okay, I'll catch up. So I grab what little water we have. I grab a towel for like sunshade. Like, I don't know what I'm going to need. I've never had to walk through the sandy desert,
Yeah.
Um, but I'm trying to think. And as I start walking, I start to pray again. I'm like, okay, God, can you please send us some angels? Like, we need like a miracle. Like, at that point, like, I knew I needed a miracle because I really thought we were going to die. Like, I pictured myself being all sun blistered, laying in the sand, all shriveled up, right?
Yeah.
And so we were in a serious spot. So I'm just kind of praying, and I walk for maybe 5 minutes, and I get onto another side road. And now by this time, Dan has caught up. He's given up on the truck. He can't get it. No matter what he's tried, he's stuck as can be. So now he's jogged forward and he's caught up to me. And he's like, this is going to be rough, but like, we've got to do it. We can do it. We're going to work as a team. Like, we're trying to pep ourselves up for this 20-mile hike through the desert. Right. And both of us feeling very doubtful, and no word of a lie. Over the horizon comes a white 1-ton dually pickup truck with a winch to pull us out on the front of it.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
you cannot make this stuff up, okay? So, like, it was an angel. It was literally an angel coming. And I said to Dan, I said, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Because I'm thinking I'm just making this up. Like, there's
Yeah.
no way that there's this random car in the middle of nowhere and it happens to be a truck with the exact equipment we need to get out. Like,
Right.
what? Like, am I
Yeah.
seeing this right? Like, it didn't make any sense because it just seemed like such a miracle. And sure enough, a man pulls up and he said, what are you guys doing out here? There's nobody out here. Like, this is dangerous. And we're like, yeah, we figured that out. He's like, well, you're in luck. He's like, I just happened to I had to run into town. And he lived way down the road, by the way.
Wow.
So there was somebody living way down yonder, but like, again, like, there was nobody there. So the fact that the timing, this goes back to me pausing and just breathing and hearing that message start walking. Had I not started to walk when I started, we would have missed that truck.
That's true. Yeah.
We would have missed the truck. So, you know, it's, like you said, fear does tend to kind of take control. Our job is to just give a little bit of space. Even if you just give a couple of breaths, just give it a little space, you guys. You don't have to conquer the fear in that moment. You just have to create enough space for divine to come in.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So if you can just get it a little bit stepped aside, taking in a breath or just saying a prayer, whatever that might be, you just need a little window of opportunity. And sometimes you can get enough in that little window that changes everything.
Yeah, open yourself up. Even when you're feeling so heavy and strung out and chaotic, if you just
Yeah.
open just a little bit, it'll come
Yes.
through.
There's the saying, when God closes a door, he opens a window kind of thing. Like, there's this opportunity for us to recognize that there's always another way. Like, in my mind, again, it was the cartel going to kill us or we're going to die in the desert, right? Like, those were my two options of the outcomes, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I kind of opened the door enough that, like, okay, wait a second. Maybe there's another way. I just couldn't
Yeah.
see the way. right? I couldn't see it. What would be the chances of a truck big enough to pull our truck out
Yeah.
and have the equipment to pull our truck out? Like,
That's so specific. Yeah.
right? It was it was one of those miracle moments for sure, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I've been blessed with some of those brushes with death many times over. Like my family jokes that like I'm like a cat and I have 9 lives. I've already used up like 6 of them, by the way.
Possibly. Yeah.
But but I'm not afraid of that anymore. Like I don't have fear anymore because I know that if I'm meant to, I'll find the other path. I'll find the window. I'll find that opportunity to change the narrative. Because
Mhm.
again, our ego wants to make up all of these narratives and all of these stories. Like it's really good at storytelling, but most of the time those stories aren't really that true, right? The ego takes little bits of these experiences and then creates these stories,
Yeah.
and you can buy into it or not. It's kind of up to us, right? Again, the power of free will to choose whether we buy into that storytelling or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. That I needed to hear that so bad. I isn't it funny how things just happen how they're supposed to happen? Like we rescheduled. I needed this conversation today. Like, thank you for
Oh,
sharing all that.
yay. Oh, I love that. You know what? Yeah. I mean, again, divine is our supply. And the
Yeah.
more we trust that divine is providing us with all the experiences and the timing in which we need to have those experiences, then we don't get all worked up when things don't go the way we think they're supposed to go. You know,
Yes.
we get attached to the way we think things are supposed to be, when in reality, there is this master plan that we've just got to start trusting.
Mhm.
In mysticism, we call it continual expectancy. So continual expectancy does not mean I expect a particular outcome, but I expect that whatever the outcome is exactly what is needed for my highest good.
Yeah. I
So if
love
I know that everything that's showing up for me, even the stuff that I'm perceiving as like not so good, right? Because there is that where it's like, oh man, I wanted it to go this way. But if I come back to trusting and saying, okay, it didn't show up the way I thought it would or the way I thought I wanted it to, but I think it's showing up for something even better, then we open ourselves up to even more possibility, right?
yeah. Yeah. That's
So
awesome.
that's the way. I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. And it's something that I've really tried to practice. And again, I'm human like anybody else. Like I have my moments where I'm like, oh man, this morning, even getting the kids to school, my daughter's like, Mom, I'm gonna be late. I need you to drive me, when I have other things that I've got on my agenda, right? It's like, okay, I'm trusting that this is exactly how it has to go this morning.
Yes.
And I leaned into that trust, and then I wasn't stressed and I wasn't anxious, and I didn't put that on her either, you know?
Yes. Yep.
So, there's something to be said about that. And it definitely is a practice that we can all lean in.
I have a question as we're wrapping up.
Mhm.
Um, I've been very into NDEs. I've watched a million videos. Like that's why when you reached out, I was like, yes, finally someone who I cannot wait to hear. So I've been very interested. Have you, I guess I have a couple questions, but have you found, I feel like I heard a lot of similarities in like other near-death experiences and yours. Like
Yeah.
what have been like the big similarities that you're like, okay, that for sure is like the truth or whatever. You know what I mean?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is oftentimes in people's NDEs is they are told that they're not done yet.
Yes. Yeah.
They have work to do.
Yes.
So that was very clear for me in what they said. They're like, no, you can't stay. You've got more work to do. And I
Hmm.
don't even remember exactly the verbiage of what they shared. It was like, you're not done yet. You have more to do. It was something to that effect. And so that was a big one for me. I know that some people don't have great NDEs where they also like feel like they're in a void or feel like they're in a more scary space. For me, that was not my experience at all. Like I am not afraid of death at all.
Mm.
I that experience in itself does not scare me anymore because I feel like I've kind of witnessed and felt and experienced what it is to be on the other side. Um, and I think for a lot of people who have NDEs, they don't necessarily fear it. In fact, we crave going back there. Like we crave that feeling almost. Like I do know some NDE survivors who they actually fall into depression and almost suicidal tendencies. Just again, also like what happened for me too, right? Of like, I just want to go back to that place so bad. This three-dimensional cesspool. Oh, let's get out of here, right? I've had to learn to really embrace this physical form
Yeah.
and this life that we're in. And remembering that my soul, very delicately, out of the thousands of bodies and the thousands of locations it could have come into, came into this one, came into
Yes.
me. And
Yes.
it very wisely said, that's the body, that's the life that's going to get her to evolve the most, to enlighten her the most. And so I recognize that and I appreciate that now more than ever. And so it helps me to be moving through this world, even though there might be some discomforts to moving through this world. So, those are some of the things that I've heard other NDE survivors, speak to.
Mhm.
But I think for a lot of us as well, is it activates a lot of our gifts and our knowing.
Yeah.
So going back to the book, the arc, it's really about remembering who we are.
Yeah.
And the NDEs will really be a catapult or catalyst for us in remembrance. A lot of us start to think, oh my God, there is so much more in this world. Like there is more beyond this physical, tangible kind of space. And there's some curiosity that gets invoked from that. So I do know a lot of people who've had NDEs who have really gone down the spiritual path
Yeah.
of discovery. But again, reminding everybody that you can just choose it. You don't need to have the experience to choose it, but oftentimes it does heighten a lot of the awareness or the remembrance in our abilities because we all have sacred gifts of intuition,
Yes.
right? Whether it's clairvoyancy, the seeing, clairaudience, the hearing, whatever it might be, we all have these incredible, incredible pieces of inner technology, these
Yeah.
inner technologies. And we've just forgotten to use them. Most of us are telepathic, and yet many of us are forgetting that. It's like when you think of a friend and the phone rings, it's like there is some, so much more going on behind the scenes that we can't see. And so, a lot of people who've had these experiences, they find even more of that. Those synchronicities become even more obvious to them. But
Mhm.
again, you can choose just to look at the world through that lens of awe and wonder as well.
Yes, that is so beautiful. That's funny you mentioned that because I was just talking to my mom downstairs and she was telling me about her friend who just started working out and she was talking about how sore she was, like just telling me this like normal life story. And then her friend calls like in the middle of her telling that. And I was
Ah, there
like
it is.
the world is so magical. Like this is so
Yeah.
fun.
We're so interconnected. If you can imagine these little threads going between you and I and all of the world, like there is this collective consciousness that happens. And so that's why when we see people stepping into this path of spirituality or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it, that's why others look and they see that and they say, oh, I want what they're having. Right. Just like that happened to me as I stepped into that holistic healthcare business and I started to see these more enlightened, higher vibrational people. And I'd be like, oh my God, they have it figured out. And I want that. And so the more we step into our light and our remembrance, the more we give permission for others to do the same. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's a beautiful sharing in that process.
Oh my gosh. This has been such a good conversation. You're so inspiring. I'm
That's
it's really cool to see you turn something that can be so dark into something so valuable and transformative. I really really appreciate you breaking everything down and sharing your experience with us.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a pleasure, Mackenzie. I love sharing these stories, and I hope that it's sprinkled a little bit of light and love on the people that are listening today.
Absolutely. I feel like I have infinite potential right now and I'm going to go
You do.
meditate.
You do. That's the beauty. You do. Yes.
Thank you
Amazing.
so much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. As a final kind of a quote, I'd like to share this just to kind of send everybody off. In every given moment, you have everything you need and then some.
I love that.
We're just remembering you have an infinite
Yes.
resource, right?
Yeah.
Of course, through divine or what have you. And I know the listeners might be curious about where they can get the book. The Ark is on Amazon. So if you search The Ark, and the author title, my pseudonym is Rose Hope. So Reverend Rose Hope is who all my speaking and all my authoring is under. Of course, DeeAnne is my birth name. So just to help the audience with that. But yeah, you can search The Ark by Rose Hope on Amazon. It's available. And of course, on my website, rosehope.ca as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I was just about to ask where people can find you. Thank you for
I
saying.
knew you were going to ask because they were like, this is where we're going next.
Yes. Yes.
I love it.
Yeah, I'll link everything in the episode notes so that people can find you. Yeah, this was very aligned and I'm so glad we connected. I'm going to be following you on everything. And it's so, just one last thing. It's so funny. You say we have everything we need in any given moment and then some. I just posted on my story uh Friday, I think it was. Literally this whole week has been a theme of I've been very aware of when I'm seeking external validation or I'm looking for fulfillment in someone else, or and then I just remind myself, and I've been reminding my audience, like, I actually have everything I need. Literally, I can create it in here and we're
There
good.
you go. You got it. There you got extra validation of your own knowing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you.
Yay. Love it. Love it. Love it.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. I'm gonna mention my after show real quick. I do bonus episodes every Tuesday in my membership, the Soul Guidance membership. So join that and you'll get more content from me. But thank you all for listening and thank you again for showing up here.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye,
If you
everyone.
enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to rate and review Divine Gossip on whatever platform you listened in on. Head to themackenziecollective.com to work with me further. If you have any questions or have any topics you want me to cover or any guests you want me to have on, please email all of that to info@themackenziecollective.com or go to the episode description to fill out my Google form. I love you. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.